Overwatch has had dozens of controversies throughout its existence, to stuff like Tracer having too sexy of a victory pose, which was then replaced with one that was pretty much on the same tier, to a legendary Mei skin that was just a recolored common skin with a hat, to the addition of Brigitte, which completely destroyed the game and its reputation. These are just a few of the many problems players have had with the game. But today, I'm going to be talking about one particular controversy of Overwatch, one that I feel still has its problems, and that is the tank role. This role has, and I think always will, have some sort of problem going on with it. But how did it end up this way? Well, I'm going to be going back in time and looking at this confusing role and its many issues. As I'm sure most of you know, Overwatch 1 was in a 6v6 format rather than 5v5, and originally had no limits to hero picks. So yes, 6 Winstons on a team was actually a viable team comp. However, it didn't take too long before character limits came around, and then role queue, eventually forcing each team to have 2 of every role, and yes, that included tanks. Now, because there were 2 tanks, they weren't exactly the 700 HP having unkillable titans they are today, with tanks having much less HP, around the 400 mark for someone like Zarya and 600 for Roadhog, and much less defensive capability. The game originally released with only 5 tanks, those being D.Va, Reinhardt, Roadhog, Winston, and Zarya. Now, during the start of Overwatch, it was more do whatever the fuck you wanted. Like I had mentioned, you could do teams of Winstons. I mean, there really wasn't anything holding you back. But eventually, people realized, hey, some of these heroes work really well together. And team comps were almost always based on what the tanks chose. And as time went on, more tanks ended up being added to the game, such as Orisa, Sigma, and Wrecking Ball. And it created a lot of tank lineups that could be utilized, with the most popular being Brawl, Rein and Zarya, and Dive, being Winston and D.Va, and very rarely Wrecking Ball. So for a little while there, it was a jolly good time, but it didn't last forever. Some things became very apparent. Number 1, some tanks were seen as just straight up throw picks. I say some, but it basically boiled down to if you weren't playing what was currently meta, i.e. you just wanted to go hog and ball, you were going to be flamed horribly for it. Number 2, following most of these metas was painstakingly boring, and that ties into number 3, that the dev team of Overwatch 1 did not know how to balance whatsoever. Like, not kidding, some of these metas that showed up, especially towards the end of Overwatch 1, were near keyboard breaking and boring to play, and overly frustrating to play against. Of course, I have to mention GOATs, which involved 3 tanks and 3 supports on one team, which definitely wasn't the main reason Overwatch had died, but it was definitely a contributing factor. And the Overwatch team did not know how to balance it, so they just decided, let's just force role queue. And so now every team comp is 2 tanks, 2 DPS, and 2 supports. But after that, 2 metas arose from the ashes that involved what? Shields. This late in the game, Overwatch now had 8 tanks, half of which had some sort of shield. So this created 2 metas, Pirate Ship and Double Shield. They're pretty much the same thing. Pirate Ship was really only on payload maps, involving a Bastion that sets up on payload, being surrounded by either Reinhardt, Orisa, or Sigma, and pumped with heals and damage boost by Baptiste and Mercy. While Double Shield was pretty much the exact same thing, but with primarily Orisa and Sigma, and the rest of the team could be really whatever they wanted. What made it even worse is that this type of comp fully resisted the likes of Brawl and Dive, making these 2 fan-favorite compositions pretty much obsolete towards the end of Overwatch 1's lifespan. So they ended up just nerfing all shields to the fucking ground. But it still didn't work, and the meta just persisted. And finally, number 4, tank players felt eyes. By this I mean, tanks were flamed and flamed hard. If a loss happened and you were underperforming as a tank, or playing ball while the rest of your team was trying to play brawl or something like that, you will be hated mercilessly. How dare you play the character you want? So, there was a lot of problems now. Metas were almost always based on what the tanks played, and most of them were ball-crushingly boring or incredibly annoying to play or go against. The devs didn't know how to fix these tanks without killing them entirely or making them broken, and tank players felt overly judged in their gameplay. So with all that, what ended up happening? Well, so in a seemingly boneheaded move, the Overwatch devs announced to the community that Overwatch 2 would now be switching to a 1-2-2 composition. Each team only allowed one tank. This immediately solved one issue, the existence of metas. Okay, great. Well, what about the other two issues? With Overwatch 2's launch, every single tank got number changes to make them much more powerful, both defensively and offensively, since each team only had one, with some even getting little reworks like Reinhardt or huge reworks like Orisa. Honestly, it worked pretty well, with no tank really being too overpowered, for the most part, because Orisa was pretty damn strong, and heroes like Hog and Ball were still pretty lacking. But most actually ended up fitting this pretty well. However, the last issue, tanks feeling singled out, was made way worse in this format, as all eyes were now on them. Even the slightest misjudgment of a situation that gets you dead, or even if you're doing well, if you end up dying or the game is lost, it is your fault. Even if your Venture has a negative KDA and you have twice the amount of elims as everyone else, it is your fault. As a tank player, I could honestly give less of a shit. I mean, I have almost 4,000 hours in this game. Toxicity doesn't really do shit to me. But even if I did piss my pants over it, I think fixing those first two issues Overwatch 1 had with tanks, I think it's worth getting the flames from the 14-year-old fatherless Andy who is mad at the world. But Overwatch 2 ended up being horribly unbalanced. For many, many reasons, not just because of tanks. But many people did blame it to this shift to one tank. And many people cried that they missed having their tank combos. I miss playing Winston Diva Dive, I miss playing Rein Zarya Brawl, or imagine the new ones you could do like Queen Hog or Ramattra Sigma or whatever the fuck. So after much convincing, which I should honestly call bullying the dev team, they brought back 2-2-2. And, well, it was pretty terrible. Much like Overwatch 1, it was very steamrolling. Either you beat the enemy team's ass or they beat yours. Not much of an in-between. Turns out, 6v6 is like 80% nostalgia and 20% actually fun. Surprisingly though, it did get its fans, and Open Queue is now always 6v6, and it is definitely not what the main game needs to be anymore. But despite all the reworks and all the controversy and all the hate towards one tank, how did the new tanks that were added to the game end up being? It was clear that Overwatch 2's new tanks were pulling away from the shields that made Overwatch 1's last few years complete garbage. So what kind of utility have these heroes had nowadays? Released the same day as the game's launch, she fit right into the role of a solo tank. Equipped with commanding shout that gains her and her allies overhealth, constant life sustain through her bleeds that come from Carnage, Gracie, and Rampage, she can definitely be a tanky son of a bitch that's hard to take down in some situations, but at the same time can be worked around. She was an absolute fan favorite from the community ever since the release of Junkertown, and her addition was hinted by the old game director during his yearly Yule logs, which I still miss a lot. And I mean, look at her. So with that, I can easily call her a very good tank who set a really good standard for what an Overwatch 2 tank should be. And honestly, there's not much more to say about her. She was that good of an addition and has had OP stints in the past, but they've never been anything game-breaking. But with that being said, how did the next tank compare? Ramattra was added immediately after Junker Queen in Season 2. Now, I could talk endlessly about his lore and how much of a missed opportunity he was as a villain, whose entire story arc got shoved into a fucking slideshow of an animated short after being promised so much more and hyped for years, but Ramattra is the definition of unique and definitely still has that Overwatch flair that makes a lot of characters so special. He's broken into two forms, Omnic, also nicknamed Mage, and Nemesis. While in Mage, you come equipped with a staff that fires nanites in a straight line, a high HP shield that lasts a few seconds, and Ravenous Vortex, a small AoE that will slow and pull enemies down to the ground. Nemesis, on the other hand, causes Ramattra to go into Roid Rage and gain a massive spike in armor, punches that go through most barriers, a self-protecting block rather than a shield, and he still has Ravenous Vortex. Overall, his kit synergizes really well and makes him a pretty good tank option. However, Ramattra is good now, but he has had an extremely rocky balancing problem. Back during his release, he was awful. Like, really awful. His mage form did not have the damage output to keep enemies back, and his nemesis form was completely outdone by the likes of Reinhardt, who could stomp his shit in. So he was terrible to start off. But what's wrong with that? Well, there's something I'm missing about him that I have not mentioned. His ultimate, Annihilation. It's still quite an annoying ability to deal with, but back during his release, it was next level retarded. Currently, Annihilation's timer will slow whenever an enemy is within it. But back during release, it would pause entirely. And not only that, his block made him practically unkillable. So what does that mean? Well, Ramattra was bad. Until you popped his ult on point, held block in a corner, and got sucked off by your supports. Then he would become the absolute destroyer of Joy, and if you got into a mirror, enjoy having a staring contest for the rest of the match. Thankfully, his ult got fixed pretty quick, but the annoyance and survivability of his block has remained persistent, and it was only just recently addressed, now having a small cooldown whenever it's put down. So nowadays, yes, Ramattra is good, but he has definitely had a rough past. The next tank, however, is, and I think will forever be a problem until something major is done to him. I'm talking about the real Roid Rager, Mauga was also an absolute fan favorite for years, just like Junker Queen, ever since he was shown off during Baptiste's release. But he finally joined the game in Season 8 of Overwatch 2, and definitely lived up to the expectation in terms of his looks and voice acting, and even his lore. However, his gameplay is one of, if not the absolute worst to be added in Overwatch. Mauga is equipped with 2 chain guns, Cha-Cha, who can ignite enemies on fire, and Gunny, who will do guaranteed critical hits to enemies who are burning. Along with that, doing those critical hits will grant Mauga self-sustain. His abilities are Overrun, which is basically a Rhine charge with much better steering power and will end with a Stomp. A Stomp that can crit and stun if you land it just right. Along with that, his other ability, Cardiac Overdrive, will grant Mauga damage reduction and allow him and teammates to heal themselves when they do damage. Finally, his ult, Cage Fight, will lock enemies in a circle with a large barrier surrounding them and reloading his chain guns. A simple kit, yes, but one that was completely overtuned when he joined the game. Tank players were already having it rough for Overwatch 2, and to make it even better, this game was blessed with this fucking semi-truck that got the most value and really only got value when he was shooting what? The enemy tank, and really only the enemy tank. When he released, his damage output was insane, his survivability was insane, and his ultimate, which charged quickly, gave him infinite ammo instead of just reloading his guns. And I talked about staring contests with Ramattra. Mauga took it to the next level, where Mauga mirrors would and still does just result in a dick measuring contest where you shoot at each other the whole time, and the only way to really outdo each other is based on what support you have. Eventually, he was nerfed to hell and back and is now in a really bad spot where he'd either be an unstoppable force or completely useless. His tank basically only allows for one playstyle, which is make the other tank miserable, and it's not very fun. So I would call Mauga bad, and he definitely requires some sort of rework, which I swear they have mentioned they're going to do, or are at least considering, but I may be going schizo. But up next, we have the most recent tank addition, which is the newest tank to be added to Overwatch 2 is Hazard. Hazard released in Season 14 and was definitely not what people I think were expecting. He comes equipped with Bone Spur, a strange weapon that is shotgun-like and shoots in like an X-like pattern. His abilities include Violent Leap, which acts a lot like a Winston jump with less distance, and can be ended with a large damaging swipe. Spike Guard, which will cause Hazard to block incoming damage and deal damage to enemies in front of him. However, unlike Ramattra, it has a resource meter, Jagged Wall, which will spawn a small purple wall that will deal damage to enemies, his ultimate Downpour, which will nail down enemies in a large line in front of him. Oh, and he has Wall Climb. So, unlike Mauga, who can literally only shoot or run, Hazard was given nothing but utility for both survivability options and fucking with the enemy team. And just like Mauga, he was immensely overtuned when he was released. The guy was practically unkillable, and on top of that, his damage output is absurd, with literally every ability he has having a way to deal damage in some sort of way. Nowadays, he's literally neck and neck with Ball as the least picked tank in the game, not only because he was nerfed into the ground, but also because, well, he's not exactly the most appealing character to look at or listen to. As much as I hate to admit it, I think this is exactly why Overwatch just keeps releasing overly sexy, half-naked, petite characters, because they always end up more popular and marketable, because we live in a society. Personally, I love the motherfucker, and he's my most played tank, but I admit he was and still can be extremely hard to deal with. And that's it. That's all the tanks Overwatch 2 has added. And mostly, they haven't really been very good. And that's mostly due to overtuning when it comes to balancing and bad gameplay mechanics. But despite all that, I do think that all of them in their current states, except Mauga, all fit right in and do their jobs well. And now we are in the modern day, where tanks are, in my opinion, the best state they've ever been in. Still not great, but the best state they've ever been in, and is very enjoyable to play, especially if you don't give a shit about toxicity. And based on release schedules, the next hero should be a tank, unless they pull some shit like they did with Vendetta and just shit out another DPS instead. But time will tell. So, with that, thank you for watching, and please have a good one, and good luck out there.